Forget retro gaming goodness.
No PC should be without it.
Undelete.
Welcome to DOS Days, a nostalgic look back at PC gaming from the mid-80s to mid-90s. This is a companion piece series to Player One Memories, which covers the arcade scene during this same period. For this series, I'll be jumping back and looking at all those great DOS era and early CD-ROM titles that I played and loved so much, as well as the times and places I experienced them. So let's jump on back to 1990, a true crossroads of gaming excellence as PC and console games really came into their own, and the quality jump for both was massive at the time. On the pop culture front, we got the immortal Arnold vehicle, Total Recall, which taught me how to
get your ass to Moss.
And to get there required a massive body count. Musically, MC Hammer managed to snag a Grammy for basically sampling the best parts of a Rick James song while wearing Aladdin pants. So the Grammy standards are pretty much the same. And finally, on the TV front, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air made its debut, which gave us the immense talent of the Carlton dance. A dance so infectious, it probably even made Charles Manson crack a smile. But let's jump on over to today's game, the 1990 Origin Systems gem, Wing Commander. I got a 286 PC computer in the early 90s, and it was my next step in my computer gaming journey. Before that, playing Sierra stuff, Prince of Persia and Civilization was all about going to a friend's house and mooching on their PCs for a few hours. But now I finally had one and sat it right next to my beloved Commodore 64. There were so many new games to explore. It was kind of overwhelming. One of those games though that caught my eye was Wing Commander. I just had to play it. I had just finished playing Space Rogue, another space sim that Origin put out in 1989, a year before this, on my Commodore 64, and I was hungry for more of the same. It turned out to be completely different, but it lived up to my hype, way more than I could ever have imagined. Wing Commander was created by Chris Roberts, who had carved out an impressive career at Origin Systems, having worked on Ultima 5, Bad Blood, Times of Law, and later on at Origin, Strike Commander. The game was essentially a space combat simulator, but it was much deeper than that, in so many ways. The basic plot is you're a pilot for the Terran Confederation defending space against the war-hungry Kilrathi aliens. The focus was space combat, but the approach was so cinematic. It made you feel like you're playing out an episode in an epic sci-fi TV show. Gameplay was a mix of chatting to people at the local bar, gleaning tips for combat, local gossip, and advancing the main storyline. And the second part was the epic missions you would partake in. Everything from wiping out small convoy groups of Kilrathi to taking on massive capital ships. It just felt so big in nature. The atmosphere of the game though is the one thing that set it apart. The cinematic presentation and the awesome soundtrack that made the mission briefings and debriefings feel much more personal, more than just a bunch of stock screens at the end of a mission. How you performed out there plays out heavily in the debriefing and hence promotions and awards. It reminded me a lot of the classic microprose simulators I played on my Commodore 64, such as Gunship and Project Stealth Fighter. The space combat though was so dynamic, with things like plotting your course and talking to your wingman, dodging asteroids and fighting for your life. The combat was so chaotic, but it always felt fresh even if you've played the mission before. The graphics were amazing for the time and still look pretty good now in my opinion. It also had a brilliant dynamic soundtrack that flawlessly switched itself up based on your flight situation. The characters you talked to were all written really well, drawing you in even more as all the missions progressed. It was just a game like no other back then. I subsequently played the rest of the series as the years went on and was blown away each time by the leaps in storytelling and graphics each one delivered, and hopefully through this series I'll get to highlight more games from this wonderful saga. If you've never tried it before, the entire PC series is available on GOG, Good Old Games, and set up to work on modern computers. There's also some really cool alternate versions of this first game in the series, such as the Sega CD version with its full voiced audio, the Super Nintendo version which is a port of all the expansion packs added to this game, and the 3DO version which is a completely different look and style to the this original. The game managed to win the 1991 Computer Gaming World's overall Game of the Year, which was much deserved, and a classic DOS game I always look back on fondly.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1992, when lead singer of Motley Crue, Vince Neil, announced that after being in the band for 11 years, he was leaving to pursue a career as a race car driver. This actually happened and is here for pure comedy relief.
So with my luck, whoever gets in my car first will probably crash it.
And on the movie front, we got Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, a movie that single-handedly made walking in slow motion with dark glasses on the coolest thing you could do in 1992. And on the TV front, we got the debut of Fox's X-Men cartoon, which single-handedly turned me into a comic book collecting fiend. Surprisingly, Fox didn't cancel it after 2 episodes. May you rest in peace, Firefly. And now on to today's game, which is Alone in the Dark. Was released in 1992 by Infogrames on DOS. It was one of the first survival horror games, although not the actual first, as that belonged to 1989's Project Firestart on the Commodore 64. But it had all the elements that made up the modern mold for the genre. The game is heavily inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft and all his Cthulhu-inspired gothic horror. The game's story has you as Edward Conby, a private detective investigating a Louisiana mansion in the 1920s after the owner mysteriously committed suicide.
The few friends I have call me Carnby. The others call me the Reptile.
It goes without saying that it's a regular breeding ground for monsters and all manner of supernatural activity. The gameplay involves searching the rooms in the 3-story mansion for clues to the backstory, as well as items to solve puzzles dotted around the mansion. The action element comes into play when facing off against zombies or giant dune-type worms in the basement and various other weird creatures. The fixed cameras, just like most games in the genre, at least initially, make these sequences pretty tricky, and with your extremely limited ammo, you have to make every shot count. And if all this sounds a little bit familiar, it goes without saying that this game was a major inspiration for Capcom's Resident Evil series in almost every aspect. Funny enough, the game was almost abandoned initially by Infogrames, with Frederick Reynolds, a programmer at the company, working on the new 3D engine in his personal time. Nobody was really convinced it could be used in a game application, but he didn't give up and worked on the demo and eventually showed it to the higher-ups, and the game was immediately greenlit after they saw it in 1991. The game was extremely atmospheric and felt like you were entering a living, breathing horror movie. With each step taken, you just had to look back over your shoulder. The sound played a major part in its atmosphere, with those echoing footsteps and creaky doors just amplifying the fear of dread. And although the DOS version does a pretty decent job with the music, the CD-ROM version excels at it in every way and is absolutely haunting. Although the predetermined cameras are the one thing that dates the game now, it was a breath of fresh air back then, really giving you the feeling of a cinematic nature that games could actually provide. Also, the clever way it was designed made the game playable on most people's PCs at the time, even though it was using cutting-edge 3D for the era. All this did is made the game even more popular with the masses. I originally played a demo of this game before rushing out to my local software shop and picking up the newly released CD-ROM version. It was a real game changer for the genre in terms of gameplay, graphics, and storytelling, and is a real classic in the best sense. The game's budget at the time was $400,000, which was pretty big. Fortunately, the game proved to be a massive hit commercially and critically for Infogrames. Sequels continued for the next 2 decades with hit-and-miss results, and also one of the worst game-to-film tie-in movies ever released.
I just killed John.
What do you mean?
He was one of them. Something was controlling him.
Then you had no choice.
I mean, that movie was almost as dumb as Attack of the Clones, and that's saying something.
The closer I get to you, the worse it gets. I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me.
I take that back.
Check out GOG.com to play this classic DOS release on your modern PCs, plus the first 3 sequels, which are all the best games really in the series, so check them out too. Many aspects of this game have not aged gracefully, but it's still a fascinating look at the roots of the survival horror genre in its modern, chunky 1992 glory.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1993 saw the release of the Pentium processor for home PCs, which contained 2 processors on a single chip and changed PC gaming forever. On the movie front, we got the Stallone action fest Cliffhanger, which gave us another dementedly good bad-guy performance from John Lithgow, who just chewed the scenery in the best possible way.
You know what real love is, Crystal?
No.
Sacrifice.
On the TV front was the debut of The X-Files, which ended up giving us 218 episodes of aliens, supernatural, and beastie goodness, and no doubt helped boost applications for the FBI's 1994 recruitment postings. And on the music front, it was all cheeseball dance music 24/7, with Hadaway's What Is Love leading the audio assault until you finally gave in and busted a groove to everybody else's embarrassment. My latest VHC home movie mutant was Mickey Play, a blatant ripoff of Child's Play, with Mickey being the demented possessed doll. Mickey? Another 90s video monstrosity. But let's jump on over to today's game, being MegaRace, released in 1993 and developed by Cryo Interactive. This was one of those early DOS CD-ROM titles that really took advantage of CD technology, tons of FMV video,
That slime ball is toasted pulp as we speak.
and these amazing for the time anyway, pre-rendered racetracks that looked insane in 1993. It was a racing destruction game that has you participating in a sort of virtual Death Race 2000 game show.
You don't want to get arrested for taking the law into your own hands. Not a problem. You know why? Because it ain't real. It's a whole lot better than real, baby. It's virtual television. Reality's white nightmare.
Where the goal was to wipe out all the competitors before taking out the boss and moving on to the next track. You could choose up to 8 different cars, and there were 5 massive tracks to play through. One of the highlights of the game though is the host, Lance Boyle, whose cheesy humor and 70s style game show host presentation.
All around us are armies of robots making armies of robots making armies. There's one over there. Hey, you! Get back to work or I'll take out my can opener!
Really adds a lot of fun and atmosphere. Weapons on your car involve machine guns and rockets, and plain old smashing the guy into the wall until he explodes.
You slam those punks into the sidewall every chance you get. High-speed explosions equals big boy.
Between levels you find out what prizes you won and makes it feel like you were just part of an episode of The Price is Right. Cryo Interactive, the makers of this, also made 2 other excellent games worth checking out in 1992, namely Dune and KGB, both adventure-style games that are quite excellent. So is this a good game? Well, it's decent, I guess, but I have a lot of nostalgia for these early CD-ROM titles that just threw everything at it to make familiar games with a new lick of paint. The graphics are quite good overall, FMV is top-notch, the pre-rendered stuff is obviously dated, and the tracks being pre-rendered themselves does limit gameplay. And speaking of gameplay, it's very simplistic, but I always found it to be extremely enjoyable. It's like playing an old early 80s arcade game.
The track features a terrifying selection of symbols which signify things like speeding up and slowing up and maybe even blowing up. Who knows? Who cares?
But I gotta give respect to Cryo for pushing the technology of the time and not simply making a regular DOS game and slapping on the obligatory voiceover and releasing it as a special CD-ROM game only. It was followed by 2 sequels, 1996's MegaRace 2 and 2001's MegaRace 3. And you can get the whole PC trilogy on GOG. Good old games for really cheap, and is probably the easiest way to play these old races. There's also some pretty good ports to the Sega CD and 3DO if those are more systems that appeal to you. Overall, MegaRace is a simple game that's average at best, but the atmosphere, humor, and the use of technology for the time make it a fun curiosity to try out and revel in a bit of 90s nostalgia.
I hate it when they ruin the suspense.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1995 was the year that our ears got assaulted by the Spanish duo Los Del Rio and their mind-numbingly bad dance song, the Macarena. If you dance to this, then shame on you. James Bond made his long-awaited return after many years of legal rights-related hell, with GoldenEye, a movie more famous for being a game than an actual movie. And on the games front, I rented from a video shop what I thought was going to be a real banger of a fighting game on my Mega Drive, Rise of the Robots. However, this turned out to be one of the worst games I've ever played in my life, so much so that I returned it to the video shop an hour later and they refunded me, and I picked up Mortal Kombat 3 instead. The cosmic balance was returned to normal. And now on to today's game, which is Star Wars Dark Forces. Was released by LucasArts in 1995 for DOS. It was a Star Wars game that was building on one of the most successful genres the DOS-era game generation ever created, the first-person shooter. After the massive success of Wolfenstein and obviously Doom, LucasArts decided to get on some of that action. They had previously brought out the excellent CD-ROM title Rebel Assault, which really, along with the brilliant X-Wing series, put Star Wars back on the map for content-hungry fans all over the world. But it wasn't simply going to be run-of-the-mill, as they'd add and tweak many things that are still seen in first-person shooters to this day. But let's first look at the story, which involves a new character called Kyle Katarn, a mercenary that works for the Rebels, as he ends up uncovering the Empire's Dark Trooper project, which is their new battle droid and armored stormtrooper divisions that are in production.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
The missions are fast-paced and an absolute blast to play, with you having access to a variety of weapons from blasters to thermal detonators, and lots of new weapons to the Star Wars universe. After a mission briefing which explains the location and specific objectives, you land your ship and begin your mission. There's a pretty expansive set of levels, everything from the decks of Star Destroyers, sewers, Jabba's yacht, and tons more, each having their own style and puzzles to solve. You also have a set of items that can be found to aid you, like night vision goggles, a mask to protect you from toxic chemicals, and so much more. These all need batteries though to power them, and can be found with ammo, shields, medkits, and all the usual items you find in this style of game. Forces, however, did bring some unique elements to the genre at the time, such as being able to look up and down at the environment, which is necessary for the other inclusion, which is being able to jump, which leads to certain platforming sequences, which are thankfully not too long, as they are definitely not the best element of the game. Shooting is exactly like Doom, as it automatically targets characters on a higher plane, so you don't have to look up and down to shoot them. This may seem a bit weird to younger people that grew up with first-person shooters in the 2000s, but this was just a natural way of playing the style of game, and I'm totally okay with it. The graphics are pretty good for the time, with a fast, solid frame rate and nice variety in the levels. The music is also quite good, especially for a MIDI, but the new Star Wars tunes fit in well with the John Williams style. Sound effects are obviously excellent and ripped straight from the movie, and really bring the whole experience together perfectly. The game was followed by 3 sequels which continue the story of Kyle Katarn, but the games themselves, although good, are very different in style, with lightsaber and hack and slash third-person mechanics thrown into the mix. The game was a big hit for LucasArts, selling just over 1 million units by 1999, which is extremely impressive if you consider the insane amount of piracy on PCs in the 90s. Overall, I think the game does a really good job of not only being a fun FPS blast, but also satisfying that Star Wars itch that people were craving back then. Little did anyone know of the avalanche of horrible Star Wars movies that were just around the corner.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
To bash us over the heads with. But I digress. Check out Dark Forces, it's available on GOG for pretty cheap.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1991 saw PC CD-ROM drives just skyrocket in popularity and were becoming more and more essential tools for computers and gaming as a whole. On the pop culture front, one of the most popular songs of that year was Bryan Adams' Everything I Do It For You, which prompted me to buy my very first music CD, Bryan Adams' Waking Up the Neighbors, and listen to that thing like a million times during that summer. On the movie front, I learned that eating a human liver with a nice Chianti and some fava beans was supposed to be really good.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Well, according to Hannibal Lecter anyway. And on the TV front, Tim the Toolman Taylor was dominating the sitcom scene, even though his signature catchphrase wasn't even in the English language. And I was still making really bad VHC home movies with our third installment in our homemade Predator series, Predator 3, which involved flying a spaceship with a Commodore 64. More dodgy blood, and even worse acting than our Die Hard movie.
He's out there, man. He's out there, man. Oh no, man.
But now let's jump on over to today's game, being Jones in the Fast Lane, which was released in 1991 by Sierra in all its 256 VGA glory. It was amongst my many new bootleg games that I just got with my new PC. If you've never played it before, it's a life simulator mixed with Monopoly, so equal parts management game and a board game. I wanted to highlight this highly enjoyable game because it's one of the most overlooked, at least in my opinion, of the classic Sierra games. The game can be played solo, which is you versus Jones, or with up to 4 human players, and it goes without saying that playing it multiplayer is even way more fun, but the single player experience is still quite excellent. Each player gets a turn, which is 1 week in your life, to make a bunch of choices like work more hours to make more money, buy that nice TV, or just take a vacation. The choices are all yours, and the goal of the game is to reach 100% success in all aspects of life, like wealth, happiness, education, and career. These are all achieved in different ways, like for example, wealth is achieved by banking your money and buying shares, and happiness can be achieved by buying consumer items and taking vacations. So basically real life stuff here. And just when you think you got a grip on things, random life events occur, just like real life, including winning tons of cash at a Vegas casino, or getting your apartment robbed by some dodgy burglar. It's all random, and there's a large degree of luck involved with this aspect of the game. And it's a very addictive game and can be played at a really fast pace, so there's always stuff to do, and whether it's climbing the ranks of your dodgy fast food job or getting an education at the local college, it's just so much fun to play out. The game also has tons of really good humor, from things people say to the sometimes bizarre situations your character can get into. There's also a really funny reference to the Space Quest series, as the fast food restaurant is called Monolith Burger, just like in Space Quest. The graphics use a combination of animation and digitized photos, and I just love the look of it, and in 1991 this just blew my mind. Music is top notch too, by Ken Allen, who worked on many other Sierra games like Roger Wilco and the Time Rippers and King's Quest V, and is a fast fun tune to get you in the mood to play this every time you load it up. In late 1992 an enhanced CD-ROM version was also released, which features full voice acting and additional animation. This is just a pure fun game to play, no instructions needed, just load it up and start playing. Half the fun of Jones is the sense that you don't know what's about to happen next, and I'd highly recommend giving this old DOS classic a spin.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1997 saw Will Smith dominate the big screen once again in Men in Black. A year earlier he helped stop an alien invasion, and in this one he helped stop an alien invasion. Hey, wait a minute.
Sorry.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, and on the games front, 3D Realms began work on Duke Nukem Forever, a game that lived up to the Forever part by eventually seeing a retail release in 2011.
What about the game, Duke? Was it any good?
Yeah, but after 12 years, it should be.
Nah. And in music news, the godfather of soul, James Brown, finally received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
I feel nice.
Which just proves Hollywood loves celebrating its PCB smoking, assault, theft, and domestic violence charged stars. Because they make such good role models.
I knew that I would.
And now let's jump on over to today's game, which is Blade Runner, which was released by Westwood Studios in 1997 on PC. The game was based on the movie,
More human than human is our motto.
which was based on the book by Philip K. Dick, which was called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and the movie adaptation was Blade Runner.
May I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Have you ever retired a human by mistake?
By veteran director Ridley Scott, released in 1982. The game, however, is not just a simple licensed product, but its storyline runs in parallel with the original movie's plot. You can look at it as the other side of the Blade Runner story. Being released during this time on PC meant that gameplay-wise it was gonna be a point-and-click adventure game with light action elements at certain points. Lewis Castle, one of the co-founders of Westwood, headed up the project personally, as it was one of his personal favorite movies. Although Westwood were probably best known for the Command & Conquer and Lands of Lore series, they had done point-and-clicks before with The Legend of Kyrandia. However, Blade Runner would defy most conventions of the genre and become its own unique experience, despite looking like a conventional point-and-click. Here's what Lewis had to say about choosing a new storyline over a direct movie adaptation. Setting our story concurrently with the film, with heavy use of replicant archetypes, is intended to allow the player to follow the film without replaying the exact story. I feel this is one of the best elements of this game. Knowing sort of what's going on, but not really. Having those nostalgic moments through familiar film locations.
Zubin was the first Nexus 6 I'd come up against. There was something in his eyes, an almost primordial desire to live.
But not the same story elements occurring make it feel like anything could happen. You play Ray McCoy, a Blade Runner cop whose job is to hunt down a band of replicants, pretty much like the original movie's plot, but it's a completely different side of the story. That's not to say if you're an eagle-eyed fan you might see Deckard in a few obscure cameos in various scenes in the game. The gameplay mechanics are broken down into three main styles. You have a traditional point-and-click element, where finding objects and examining them leads to new clues and locations. There's also the action element, where quick reflexes are required to either blast a replicant or escape deadly situations comes into effect. And then there is the analysis part, where you use the ESPA machine to examine photos from crime scenes.
He looks familiar. Give me a hard copy of that.
Or the Voidcom test on people to determine if they are human or replicant.
You're at a restaurant with friends. One of them orders lobster. The chef drops the lobster into the tub of boiling water while you watch.
Are you trying to make me sick?
Just like the movie. My favorite aspect of this game though is the lack of puzzles or pixel hunting. There's virtually none of it. So if you're the type of person who always eventually gets stuck in one of those obtuse Sierra style puzzlers, then this is not going to happen here, as everything on all three gameplay styles pushes the story forward in some way, so complete dead ends are avoided. The game is also random and plays in real time, unlike most games of the genre. And what I mean by that is, other Blade Runners are also investigating and working on your storyline. So you uploading clues that you find to the local police station computer aids them, and they in turn find out stuff that can aid you.
Downloading mainframe clue database.
But the best random element is the fact that the game randomly chooses, of course, who's going to be a replicant and who's going to be human every time you start a new game. That experience obviously always keeps you on your toes, as you never know who's who. Choices in the story also lead the plot down very different paths, which can determine one of the 13 possible endings for the game. So the replay value is obviously really high. The graphics were amazing for 1997 and still are extremely impressive, with the attention to detail, just like the movie, amped up to the max. And here's Lewis on how they managed to capture the style of the movie so well. We went out of our way to find people who worked on the film. From Sid Mead to the behind the camera talent, our access to the people who made the film helped us achieve what I feel was a very authentic presentation of the Blade Runner world. Not only was the look captured perfectly, but there were also cameos by many of the film's main cast, including James Hong.
Hey, wait, LPD, you there for something, huh? LPD? I'm very busy. I won't wait for nothing.
William Sanderson.
Hello, it's JF Sebastian. I hope you guys are alright.
And Brian James and Sean Young, to name a few. Some of these characters can also be completely missed in your storyline due to the many paths the player can choose to take. The sound is also pitch perfect. It comprises mostly of the claustrophobic cityscape sound of the original movie, mixed in with chunks of original score, and perfect recreations of the original movie's tracks. It really sounds like an extension of the movie's atmosphere. The game was a massive hit for Westwood, selling over 1 million copies, which was a huge amount, with rave reviews across the board for the magazines of the time. My personal favorite aspect of this game, though, is how it manages to tell such a compelling story so randomly, as well as the non-reliance on annoying puzzles always push the action forward, which was and is a breath of fresh air in this genre. And here's Lewis on what parts of the game he was most proud of. Our team's ability to capture the feeling of the Blade Runner universe really really made me proud. It's so exciting to think that there are no perfect correct solutions, since every player has consequences of choice rather than a simple branching storyline. And that's Blade Runner in a nutshell. If you want to play it, check out GOG as it's available there and automatically is set up to play on your modern PCs. Having played this game originally in 1997 and again now, I can honestly say this game has lost none of its appeal. In fact, in today's modern gaming climate, it's even better quality now than it ever was. And now let's go on over to 1995 unleashed many things we know and love today, such as the DVD format, which was first officially announced that year. eBay saw its launch onto the World Wide Web and is responsible for at least half my big box PC and Commodore 64 collection. So thank you very much. In other news, the Grateful Dead announced that they were breaking up. The only problem is nobody knew any of them were still alive in the first place. On the TV front saw the debut of Xena Warrior Princess, one of my favorite TV shows. Man, did Lucy Lawless kill a lot of people in that show. Like, I mean a lot. And me and a friend were inspired to remake the movie Highlander for no apparent reason and literally made our own funky version filled with head chopping, sword fighting, flashback loaded melodramatics. It's obviously total garbage, but making it was such a blast. And now let's jump on over to today's game, which is Crusader No Remorse. Was released in 1995 on DOS by Origin Systems. This game came out during the glory days of CD-ROM gaming, as it took advantage of every aspect of the media, from CG cutscenes to FMV story sequences.
First, let me say welcome to the Resistance, Captain.
Full CD quality music and audio, and a massive size of the game no doubt maxed out the CD storage capacity. Origin were riding pretty hard during the second wave of their history. The classic RPG and strategy games of the 80s had given way to the equally as cool story-driven cinematic approach of their 90s games, like Wing Commander, Strike Commander, and this series as well. Crusader can best be described as a 2D isometric style action game with an emphasis on mission objectives, freedom of how you tackle a situation, and a strong story element. The game has you as an enhanced super soldier who works for the World Economic Consortium, who keeps order by crushing anyone with a difference of opinion. Until you decide to defect over to the Resistance and attempt to bring them down. The basic structure of the game is you get a mission, which is told through FMV.
The rest of the job falls to you, Captain. Once Andrews confirms your insertion coordinates, you are to locate and free the prisoners from H-37.
You equip yourself up at the local shop with whatever you think you'll need and then proceed to the level. There are 15 missions in total, with each one is quite massive in nature, with objectives involving blowing up a refinery, rescuing captured rebel soldiers, and many more also with side objectives. You are generally trying to make your way to a location to complete an objective, but how you do that is totally up to you. It's pretty open with how you deal with situations, like just go in guns blazing, kill everybody including civilians, or hack a robot or turret in another room and let it do the dirty work for you. You also have a multitude of cool weapons and gadgets, from C4 explosives, spider drone bombs, shotguns, lasers, and much more. One of the best parts is that the environments are extremely destructible, adding to the chaos, action, and strategy. The game runs off a much enhanced version of the Ultima Pagan engine, which came out 1 year earlier. After completing a mission, you get to lounge at your rebel base, where you can chat with all the other characters and buy and sell all the loot you lifted off soldiers and civilians you whacked in the previous level, before proceeding to your next mission. Gameplay is really good, and there are actually two ways of playing this game. One with a mouse and one with a keyboard. My advice personally would be to play this game with keyboard, which works quite excellently and is very accurate to use. Using the mouse is a bit of a mess, but some people do like it this way, but I personally think the keyboard is the way to go. The look is quite excellent, with sharp, detailed graphics and high quality FMV sequences with a bit of cheese here and there.
Come, hello.
But honestly, that's how I like my FMV anyway. The music is pretty brilliant, with its industrial kind of rock beats. Each track is an absolute treat, as are the excellent use of sound effects throughout. The game reviewed really well, and it sold 250,000 copies and was one of their most successful games, which obviously led to 1996's sequel, Crusader No Regret, and ports to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation for the original in 1997. Overall, this is a pretty unique game in style and atmosphere, and a real testament to that PC games were just as capable of making those grandiose action games like the consoles of the time, while still keeping all the depth and detail PC gamers had come to love.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1993 was a year filled with so many things I loved. On the movie front, we got the Stallone Snap sci-fi action fest Demolition Man, a very clever parody of modern 90s society amped up to the extreme.
We're police officers. We're not trained to handle this kind of violence.
The best part is watching it now and seeing how accurate they interpreted the future was gonna be.
How you doing?
We are not used to physical contact readings.
The Animaniacs burst onto the cartoon scene and I couldn't get enough of it. Like Demolition Man, it was a cleverly disguised parody of society, clearly aimed at adults, but with enough goofiness to still keep the kids entertained. And of course it gave us Pinky in the Brain, so double thumbs up. And lastly, on the music front, Rick Astley announced his retirement from the music business at the tender age of 27, and 40 million record sales later. Many years later though, he'd get his revenge on all of us. And now on to today's game, which was Call of Cthulhu, Shadow the Comet, released in 1993 by Infogrames. It was released on DOS, followed by an enhanced CD-ROM version, which is the one we are looking at here. It's a grand old-fashioned style point-and-click adventure game with gothic type overtones. Subject matter-wise, it's similar to Infogrames' previous release in 1992, Alone in the Dark, as they both pull from the same source material for the inspiration, that being the works of author H.P. Lovecraft and his supernatural Cthulhu universe. The game is said to be inspired by two stories in particular, the Dunwich Horror and Shadow over Innsmouth, which are some of the author's most notable works. The game takes place in 1910 as you take the role of John Parker, a journalist/astronomer who sets off to a small New England town, Innsmouth, to document the passing of Halley's Comet, but also investigate how it managed to send a fellow astronomer, Lord Boleskine, into madness. I actually bought this game upon its original release, and is one of the few point-and-click adventure games that I actually managed to complete back in the day. I had the original disc version though, so it's pretty cool all these years later to try out this enhanced version. As you arrive in Innsmouth, all is not what it seems, and the more you talk to the townsfolk and investigate the Lord Boleskine case, the deeper you go, both figuratively and literally. Chatting to people is one of its best features, as dialogue trees appear and these wonderful big portraits of the characters themselves, coupled with the CD version's voiceovers, really suck you into the dark and twisted world. The original version is keyboard controlled, but this enhanced CD-ROM version adds mouse support, making it feel much more traditional and natural to the point-and-click genre, and is a welcome addition. Gameplay is all about talking to people and triggering events, as well as picking up objects and solving puzzles. One of the best aspects of this though is the lack of Sierra-style pixel hunting, as when objects in the vicinity are something you can get, your character's eyeline focuses on them, eliminating a lot of tedium. Puzzles are also fairly logical, and none of these ridiculous Roberta Williams type scenarios happen, which is a welcome change for this genre. The more you play it, the more intriguing the story gets, and the genuine dark atmosphere even has a few chilling moments enhanced by the ominous soundtrack. The game sports wonderful chunky pixel art, enhanced greatly generally speaking by pretty good voiceovers, and an extremely atmospheric music score, although it does repeat itself way too often. The simple controls are easy to get to grips with, although navigating around is a bit cumbersome as the walking is not fully configured, meaning you control John almost like a tank. It's a bit frustrating but tolerable. Overall though, the story and atmosphere far outweigh these minor niggles. PC Zone magazine back in 1993 had this to say about it: Shadow the Comet is a real gem and deserves to be played by every fan of graphic adventures. And the game was really well received, just like Alone in the Dark, although this seemingly has faded almost into obscurity from the general public. Fortunately though, it is easily available for modern users on both Steam and GOG, with both versions available. so there's no excuse not to give it a try. Please also check out episode number 8 of DOS Days for more on Alone in the Dark. And if you like H.P. Lovecraft or are just a fan of gothic horror tales in general, Shadow of the Comet is a fantastic forgotten adventure experience.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1993, which saw the last of the official Commodore retail games trickle out the door. Luckily, I still had my C64 and was able to enjoy the sublime platform masterpiece that was Mayhem in Monsterland. Yay 8-bit. On the TV front, we saw the debut of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which bucked the trend of the franchise by introducing ongoing storylines and characters as opposed to Trek's usual self-contained episodes.
Take a sip of this.
What is it?
A human drink. It's called root beer.
I don't know.
Come on. Aren't you just a little bit curious? What do you think? It's vile.
It still remains my favorite Trek series of all time. On the movie front, I got to see the totally underappreciated late Joel Schumacher masterpiece, Falling Down, which gave us Michael Douglas at his career best.
How about you, son? Is it good? And you, man? How's the food?
Seriously, watch this movie if you haven't already. And on the music front, we got Break It Down Again by Tears for Fears, which is without a doubt their least known song, but it's still an absolutely fantastic tune worth taking a listen to. And now let's jump on over to today's game, which is Gabriel Knight's Sins of the Fathers, released by Sierra in 1993. The game was created by Jane Jensen, who was a bit of a veteran at Sierra at that point, having worked on not only this, but Police Quest 3 and King's Quest 6, and various other Sierra classics. This was her first game she had total control over, writer, designer, and director. The game itself is a point-and-click adventure game, which is what Sierra did best, except this one had a much darker, more mature tone, with its story about horror novelist Gabriel doing investigations into a series of voodoo-related murders in New Orleans for his latest book. The game's structure is the whole story takes place over a few days, and by completing certain story criteria will lead you to the next day, in a similar vein to the Tex Murphy adventure games. The gameplay is a mix of traditional point-and-click puzzles and interrogating people for information, which leads to new locations and more puzzles. It features all the usual icons for its gameplay mechanics like look, talk, open, close, etc, etc. So if you've played any game in this genre before, you'll be right at home.
I've got some things I need to do.
Don't hurry back on my account.
The story is definitely the highlight, as are the characters, all being very likable and intriguing, with a story that's pretty mature in nature and doesn't shy away from going down the rabbit hole real deep, and is not only restricted to the city of New Orleans, but goes globetrotting to Germany and Africa later as the story unfolds. The atmosphere in this game is brought to life brilliantly with the excellent voice cast for all the characters, including Tim Curry as Gabriel, who despite the fact that his accent slips into Congo, what the hell is that territory every once in a while,
Herkema Homolka, formerly of Romania, free now of the chains of Ceausescu, traveling the world, doing good.
does a great job, as does Leah Remini as his assistant Grace, who adds a lot of good sass to the character.
What can I say? I refuse to be bound by rules.
The strap marks on your bedpost speak otherwise.
We also get other veterans like Mark Hamill and Michael Dorn to round out the brilliant list of casting. Just like any good movie, Gabriel draws you in and the story unfolds with more and more intrigue as the investigation continues, and is paced really well, with each interrogation and piece of information learned leading to new opportunities. Very rarely did I get stuck in this game, unlike other offerings in this genre. It's got a couple of dodgy puzzles just like all these games, but mostly the story keeps going, and thus your attention is kept. Here's what Jane had to say about it.
But as a writer, when I came here, I kind of got inspired thinking about how far this medium could go. Sierra was already at that point changing a lot of its direction, and I feel very strongly that this medium can be as powerful of entertainment as any film or any book or any, comic or whatever medium you have. And I don't think that, I try not to limit my thinking about the powerful nature of the story because it's a computer game. I think that we can make computer games that are just as good as any other form of entertainment.
The graphics and animation are really good, and the darker, more macabre vibe definitely shines through and adds a great sense of dread. The music and voiceovers, as mentioned, are top quality stuff and only add to the looming atmosphere, which draws more dim and weird with every interrogation. The game was followed by 2 sequels, The Beast Within and Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned, with each entry being in a new style of adventure presentation. This one being the traditional point and click, The Beast Within employing 90s FMV tropes, and Blood of the Sacred jumping into the 3D polygon style. Jane later said in an interview that the game was inspired by the Alan Parker movie Angel Heart, which is a great movie by the way, so definitely check that out. She also said, one of the great things about Sierra was that Ken Williams really believed in the artistic vision. If he gave you the chance to do a game, that was your responsibility. Nobody told you what to do with it. If it didn't sell well, then you wouldn't do another game for him, but he would let you have that freedom. The game fortunately was a big hit, and Jane had her freedom to make her trilogy, with Computer Gaming World in a review in 1993 saying, Gabriel Knight is an exceptional blend of art, game and understanding. It's mature audiences for all the right reasons. If you want to play the entire trilogy, it's available on GOG, Good Old Games, for really cheap, as is 2014's 20th anniversary remake, which was headed up by Jane Jensen herself. So why not fire this up and jump down that dark hole and experience a mysterious but completely fascinating adventure you won't soon forget.
Game over.
And now let's go on over to 1997 saw the release of one of the worst comic book movies put to film in the form of Batman and Robin, a ham-fisted attempt to mash Batman 66's campiness with a Tim Burton movie, and some of the seriously most abysmal casting in movie history. It's an absolute cringe fest. Still though, more entertaining than any of the Christopher Nolan attempts. And on the gaming front, the PS1 gave me one of its all-time best games, Parappa the Rapper, igniting the home video game music genre, as well as giving us all sorts of words of wisdom. And over on the real music front, Puff Daddy and Mace released Can't Nobody Hold Me Down, a laughable attempt at a mashup of one of my favorite 80s songs by Matthew Wilder, which has one of the most tone-deaf butcherings of a classic music hook I've ever heard.
Can't nobody take my pride. Can't nobody hold me down. Oh no, I got to keep on moving.
If you know the original, this will cause you to seriously consider suicide. And on the subject of murder, let's flip over to today's game, the 1997 release of The Last Express, published by Broderbund on Windows and DOS. A game whose genre was at its peak, the classic point-and-click adventure style, mixed in with a murder mystery akin to The Colonel's Bequest or Killed Until Dead. The game was headed up by writer and designer Jordan Mechner of Prince of Persia and Karateka fame, who formed and built an entire studio, Smoking Car Productions, in 1993 in San Francisco to make this one game their only release. The game mixed in multiple genres, with the base being a point-and-click style, with real-time elements, puzzles, and light action sequences. It tries to do a lot, and for the most part, it's very successful. The story has your character, an American on the run from the police for a suspected murder in 1914 at the break of World War I. You're escaping Paris by boarding the Orient Express, a real-life train that made its way through Europe at the time, and plan to meet your friend on board. The train runs from Paris to Constantinople, with that being the allotted time you have to complete the game. But once on board, however, you discover your friend dead in this compartment, and thus the mystery is set in motion.
We wanted this to be an exciting, romantic, adventurous, nostalgic spy story.
To say this game is unique is an understatement. It employs a very almost minimalistic point-and-click style that even if you never played one of these styles of games, it'll be very easy for you to get into and play. But one of its most unique ideas is the fact that it takes place in real time, which is generally unlike most games in the genre. What this means is characters and events are all happening all the time, and you can miss events or you can steer plots in completely different directions by simply being at the right place at the right time.
It's being scripted as the player plays it, and I think if you take the game home and play it, you're going to see things, combinations that we never saw here and never planned.
Usually this kind of thing wouldn't appeal to me, but this game implements these sequences so effectively. It truly not only feels like a new game every time you restart it, but everything feels very natural. Gameplay involves talking to the 30 plus characters who are all very interesting and fleshed out extremely well, solving logical puzzles, and getting into the occasional action sequence, which is the only weak part of the game, but it doesn't bring it down by any means. Being stuck on a train confines the action and story just like any good old murder mystery book. For example, Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, which this is clearly taking some inspiration from. But it does help focus the plot as you get used to the layout of the train. Your initial game will be an absolute disaster. I remember playing it back in the day and taking forever just to find my compartment to start the game. It may be slightly annoying at first, but learning the layout of the train quickly becomes second nature, and therefore the game gets a lot better from then on. The graphic style is absolutely amazing, combining rotoscoping techniques that Jordan mastered on Prince of Persia, as well as still photography to make up its unique look, which mimics paintings from this era of history.
Part of the inspiration was the Art Nouveau style that was in vogue in 1914. If you look at the paintings of Toulouse-Lautrec, Alphonse Mucha, and much of the poster art of the time, this was really the forerunner of the modern comic book.
Music as well has that full, rich cinematic feel, which makes it feel like you're watching an old 1930s style murder mystery movie. The game was eventually released by Broderbund in 1997, after almost 5 years of production, to a resounding thud, at least sales-wise. The timing for the game couldn't possibly be any worse. Broderbund's entire marketing team just quit weeks before the game's release, leaving almost no advertising for the game being made. And on top of that, Broderbund themselves got bought out by the Learning Company at the exact same time, leaving Last Express as the last game to scrape out the door as Broderbund folded. This game was never reprinted and only managed to sell 100,000 units before going out of print, with its reported budget being between $5 and $6 million. This effectively ended Smoking Car Productions as well, and in a sense kicking off the end of the classic point-and-click adventure style genre commercially for many years to come. It's a real shame. It garnered some really great reviews in almost every publication.
We tried to be very true to the spirit, not only of the train, but of the period and of things that were happening in Europe in different spheres at the time. As much as we could find out, this is what the last journey of the Orient Express in July 1914 was like.
It was just simply impossible to find the game to play it. Overall though, if you're an adventurous gamer and want to try something familiar yet vastly different at the same time, then this brilliant genre-defining game may be well up your alley.